She was this gun-toting, whiskey-drinking broad.
The super epic fucking broad.
She was a pioneer in the industry.
She's also so famous and so controversial.
So controversial.
So she's kind of a big fucking deal.
Her story is so incredible. She belongs on this podcast because she's a broad you should know. Hello and welcome to Broads You Should Know, the podcast about amazing and noteworthy women from history. I am your host, Sara Gorski. And listeners, I'm here today with a brand new guest for you who I am so excited to welcome today. We have Therese Oneill. Hi, Teresa.
Hi, Sara.
Listeners, Teresa is an incredible writer about the stories of amazing women. So she is far more qualified to talk about the broad that we are going to talk about today. So I am thrilled to have her here. Teresa, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
I'm a writer who lives in Oregon with my family. I have written a couple books. They're the pink ones behind me and the green one and a blue one. And they're all about the funnier side of how bizarre and terrible history was, because it's also, like I said, we laugh so that we do not cry sometimes.
We feel that on this episode, on this podcast, like very strongly. That is definitely something we relate to.
My job is to dig up the forgotten stuff of the past and spit shine it, and then make you interested in it. Because, as you've already seen in our pre-talk, I get super excited over the strangest little thing, and I got to get you excited too. And I'm a pretty good writer doing that. So.
Listeners, Teresa's most recent book, which contains the broad we're talking about today, I just love the title of it, so I want to say it out loud. Unbecoming a Lady, The Forgotten Sluts and Shrews Who Shaped America. She's holding it up on camera if you're on YouTube. And we'll post a link to it on the website, as we always do, including more information about Teresa. But listeners, I'm super excited. Today we're going to be talking about Elizabeth Packard. And some of you might remember I mentioned her back in our series on women they called crazy, because she kind of is like the epitome of women called crazy, because she literally spent quite a bit of time in an insane asylum, and not for probably the reasons you think people go to insane asylums. So I'm gonna let Teresa kick it off from here. Tell us about her.
Well, she was a lovely lady. The incidents that really shaped her life took place around 1860. They started in 1860. She was from Illinois, a northerner. She
like
was
me
educated.
Both Illinoisans.
Oh, you're from Illinois too?
Yes.
You're going to feel this deep, Sara. Hang on. She was educated very much for her time and place, for a lady, and then lady seminary. She was married to a prominent Calvinist minister. And they had a happy family, happy life. And then in the late 1950s, he had a house guest come stay who wasn't Calvinist, like really close to it. I don't remember, but still Christian, still very close. But it made her start to question whether or not Calvinism was the one true way for all people who believed in God to believe. Mm-hmm. And she started to say so out loud at like the dinner table. And then one day in 1860, her husband, oh my gosh, I'm going to remember his name but I have to see it to say it.
Well, listen, while you're looking that up really quick though, so is it correct? So I read that book by Kate Moore, The Woman They Could Not Silence, which is all about her. And I feel like I remember in that book that part of the big difference in their opinions about religion also was like very strongly connected with abolition, right? Where like there was all these like political powers in the church right now, and the church was kind of like shifting and splitting between like there was like a conservative and a liberal, and the liberals believed in abolition and the conservatives did not want abolition. They wanted slavery to stay in place. Is that correct?
That tracks. That tracks.
Man, it's so dramatic.
Her husband's name was Theophilus, the good Reverend Theophilus Packard. So
you don't have to call him good. He's not good at all in this story.
And let me tell you the story about how everything started. One morning, she woke up, normal morning. She was still in her dressing gown, and as a religious lady of the 1860s, that was quite next to being naked. Mm-hmm. And the door bursts open, and in walks her bedroom door, and walks her husband and two doctors from his congregation, and I do this because being a doctor back then was, if you'd figured out mustard poultices and which stick to stick in someone's mouth when you cut their limbs off, then you're a doctor. But they came and they took her pulse and they asked her a few questions, which I really want to share with you later because I wrote them down what they asked her. It came up in her trial later. And they basically nodded at each other and in 10 minutes time declared her insane and took her on a chair, tied to a chair, out of the house to a train and committed her to the state asylum for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because she was not wanting to really be a Presbyterian Calvinist anymore. So that was her crime.
Yeah.
And it was proved she went and she was insane. And they took her and they kept her, oh gosh, I have to check 2 to 3 years at the insane asylum.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said she was incurable. We can't make her believe like you do. So they gave her back to her husband. Okay. So what do you do in Victorian times when you get a crazy wife? You know what you do. You lock her somewhere. You lock her in an attic from a door that only locks on the outside, and you nail shut the windows. And that's exactly what he did. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And she lived like that for a while, and she was able to shove a little message out through the crack in a window to the pump man. I'm not sure what a pump man was. Somebody that checked the pump. Come on. Do you know? We don't know. Somebody checking the pumps for water, I guess.
Yeah.
And the note of her wrongful imprisonment got out to a friend, and sure enough, she got a trial because she said, I'm not crazy, I'm being wrongfully imprisoned. And though it was perfectly legal, the Illinois statute, section 15, ratified 1851, section 10 says, a married woman who are evidently insane or distracted, yes, may be detained in the hospital on the request of the husband without evidence of insanity required, as in other cases.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was legal. So what he did was perfectly legal, but he wasn't allowed to keep her locked up. That was kidnapping, and that was for some reason illegal. So then she got a trial to decide whether or not she was insane. And they had the doctors who had her committed come testify, and I actually wrote that down because it was so freaking funny. And in a sad way, but so freaking funny. Can I read to you what the reasons they gave? Okay, so
Yeah.
there were 2 doctors. This is my favorite one, J.W. Brown. And again, doctor.
Uh-huh.
Okay, proof number 1 that Elizabeth was insane. 1, she disliked to be called insane, which, is obviously some verbally defiant, dysregulated mood disorder right there. Okay, number 2, an incoherency of thought that she failed to illuminate me with light because he has higher standards apparently for women in his life, and when they talk, he should be illuminated with light. Number 3, her aversion to being called insane because that's recurrent verbally defiant, dysregulated mood, I guess. Number 4, her belief that to call her insane was abuse against the Holy Ghost, her belief that some calamity would befall her owing to my being there, and her refusal to shake my hand when I left, which I think was just her ability to read the room. And her viewing, this one, like there's actual laughter in the courtroom. Her viewing the subject of religion from the, quote, austeric standpoint of Christian exegetical analysis and agglutinating the polysynthetical ectoblasts of homogeneous asceticism. And all I can think of is, well met, sir. If Ghostbusters has taught us anything, it is that supernatural conflict can be halted with the use of ectoblasts. Otherwise, I think that's what you meant, because otherwise what you said makes no sense at all.
Oh my
So,
God. All made up. These are all made up reasons.
Well, here's the thing. And the other guy said, well, she wouldn't want to leave our church if she wasn't insane. That's how we know she's insane. Why would she want to stop being a Calvinist?
Yeah.
And so the jury I wrote down, the jury left the room to deliberate whether or not she was crazy, and they were gone for 7 minutes. And they came back, and they said, she's not crazy. You have to let her go. But check this out. Before they came back, the last day of the trial, Theophilus, her husband, mortgaged the house, which was bought with her dowry money, sold all her belongings, did one more terrible thing, and fled the state with her kids. So that when she came out of the trial, she had nothing. She had her freedom, such as it was for a woman in that time, with no money, no husband, and nothing else.
Yeah.
Terrible person. And I'm going to send you a picture of his face so you can see he looks like a perpetually crowning fetus. He's got this round the face beard, fuzzy hair.
He does.
You'll love it.
He's
anyway.
Disgusting. Can I take a second? And we covered a lot so fast. I kind of want to go back and talk a little more about the Asylum.
I know very little about the Asylum. I compared to the lady you read.
Yeah, I can fill in a little bit from the Kate Moore book. But Dr. McFarland was the name of the guy who ran this hospital. And listeners, if you will recall, in this time period, women were still the property of their husbands, and they were controlled by men, right? They had no individuality as an entity in the eyes of the state, which is why she was, quote, committed by her husband, purely for the reason, and I know you mentioned because she didn't want to be a Calvinist anymore, but it wasn't even just that. It was that she was being loud about it. And she was starting to make his own congregation kind of like think a little bit differently and move them. And he didn't like that. He wanted his position very secure as a reverend. And
if your own wife
her out of there because she would not shut up, and she would not, and it wasn't like dinner talk table. It was like her talking to other people and starting to think about it and write about it. And so when she was in the asylum, oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
What you nailed down what she was doing, that she was being too loud. Compared to what she was about to do once this all went down and once she got out. If she was scared of a little bit of disruption in his congregation, she was about to air every stinky inch of dirty family laundry possible for the rest of her life because of what he did to her. So maybe he should have just stuck it out when it was just a congregation.
No, he's obviously not very smart. Everything we read, I just call him Theo because I don't know how to say his name right. Like everything Theo did, like, are the acts of like a very ignorant, angry, like fear-mongering control freak, right? Yeah. And so he sends her to the hospital. He gets her committed, and then she basically comes under the care of Dr. McFarland. Like he is basically in like the man in charge of her now. He becomes instead of her husband now, Dr. McFarland is the number one man in her life. And at first she is put in a wing with a bunch of other women just like her. Basically men who did not want to deal with their wives for various varied reasons, but none of which were actual insanity. Most of them were either loud or they didn't obey, or like it was like a huge variety of reasons. But the husband didn't have to, like, there was no investigation in terms of into the husband's accusations. The husband would just say, she's crazy. And in Theo's case, he got these like two doctors to validate his opinion.
Yes. And then it's literally on the book, Sarah. It's Illinois Statute, Section 15, ratified 1851, page 96, Section 10. It's on the books, a true law. You can commit your wife with no reason.
Yep.
But you can't hold her hostage. That's kidnapping. I don't know what the difference is.
So when she's in this wing in the hospital with a bunch of other women with the same issue, which is that their husbands just didn't like them anymore. And she's talking with these women, and they're allowed to like gather and have tea. They're actually treated pretty well because many of them were moneyed women. The first women that she was around in the wing that she was in. And so she's looking at all these women and talking to these women, and she's like, what is going on here? Why are we here? How is this being allowed? And she was kind of furiously writing letters to people, trying to kind of like build her case.
They were intercepted, right?
Say what?
Those letters were all intercepted, weren't they?
That is exactly right. Dr. McFarland did not allow any of her outgoing mail or give her any of her incoming mail.
Yeah.
So this is also an era before patient rights. So now patients enjoy some rights from the state
she did that
to protect them. And at this era, there was none of that. It's like you were in the insane asylum and you basically just kind of disappeared from any sort of like personal rights. So all of all of her efforts to like, because she was actually like a very charismatic, popular woman, which is part of why her husband put her away, is she talked to a lot of people. She was very well liked. And so her opinions were kind of getting around. And so she tried to write to all of her friends and her family and her kids, because some of her kids were like old enough to sort of understand this stuff.
And her parents were still alive too.
Yeah. And none of these letters went through.
Minneapolis.
Yeah. And I won't get into the nitty gritty. And listeners, if you like really want to hear the deep shit of the Asylum, you got to check out this book by Kate Moore.
I'm in the room.
No, your book too. Your book too.
So much room on the nonfiction shelf, Sarah.
Read all the books. I want everyone to read everything about Elizabeth Packard.
Right. And she did a good book, and the woman's brilliant. Yes, read it. She wrote Radium Girls too. So.
But she, she's the woman who wrote Radium Girls.
Yes, she's wonderful. Anyway,
but she, basically, Elizabeth starts to kind of protest more louder and louder to Dr. McFarland and to the staff, and she kind of like wins over some staff members for coming. Like she was kind of being allowed some special privileges, and she also like those privileges included her being able to walk the grounds a little bit more than patients who are like tied to a bed, right? And so she's walking the grounds and she walks past other wings and she hears terrible noises coming out of these other wings. So it's, unlike the rich wing that she's a part of, there's some crazy, terrible, basically torture type things. This is the era where they would just electroshock patients like that, and they would dump them in the cold baths or hold them underwater, and they would do trigger. I should have done a trigger warning. Like this is all very like women were basically being and mental patients in general, but these women in that other wing were being tortured. And she started to kind of talk about it, and she eventually, the short version of the story is that she gets moved to that wing because she's too loud. So she kind of loses her privilege wing. She gets moved to this other wing, and she like, despite the fact, like despite the fact that she enjoyed those privileges, once she got to this wing, she kind of like committed herself to just doing the best she could to help the women around her, who were obviously not women of means, who did not come from money, who did not, because Elizabeth and her husband were like decently well off, not necessarily later on, but compared to the women in this wing, the poor women, the women with, she would try to help clean them up. She started to give them baths. Like they were unbathed and they were like in rooms with like shit on the wall and like
on the floor,
and she started to like clean their rooms and clean them up. And she kind of like became an advocate for these women who had nobody to care for them, because like, I think that, and from what it seemed like in the book, in Kate's book, that it seemed like the staff, it seemed like that it was more of a staffing issue rather than like the staff were jerks. It's more like they just didn't have the capacity and the budgets to do anything. And so these women were just kind of allowed to fester. And
so she sort of behaved as if a person who actually intended to follow the teachings of Christ should behave instead of locking other people up.
Yeah.
She went and cleaned
and in the meantime, Dr. McFarland still kind of wielded power over her the whole time she was in the asylum. And he promised her that he would publish a book if she wrote it. She began writing when she was in the asylum. She was allowed paper and a pen, and she would write. And obviously her letters didn't get sent out, but she would kind of hide her pages in her dresses.
I mean, just prove her more insane if that got. I mean, it's such a trap, such a snake pit. That used to be the term for being insane. Yeah, it's a snake pit, or we call it even gaslighting today.
Yeah,
I warn it because they probably actually use gaslight in that. Sorry, don't let me do that, sir. Yes, welcome to class.
But so she basically ends up, she has a lot of time. She's not caring for her family and doing all the things she did, when she was a housewife. So say what?
She honed her writing skills, which would come in really handy when she got out.
And her beliefs. Like, so her anti-Calvinist beliefs, she really kind of was developing kind of her view of life and of what's right and wrong in the world, like, and her kind of modified religious beliefs. And she ends up writing this long manifesto about life and about like liberty and religious freedom and God. And she writes almost basically a novel. It's almost a short novel, this manifesto. And McFarland this whole time like had been promising her that he was going to send it and get it published and help her publish it. And then of course he doesn't, because he's a dick.
And we all sit in shock. But they still let her go because she was incurable. After a couple of years, maybe they just didn't want to deal with her anymore. They needed the bed space or the money ran out. Do you know why they decided?
It's in the book, and I'm trying to remember because it's been a bit since I finished this book. I'll see if I can find it before the end of this episode. But yeah,
I love that. I love that it was the holding her against her will that was illegal. And they really, and maybe it was her personality. Maybe she was, but when she was put back in her own hometown, maybe there's enough people like going, hold on, this doesn't track. We know Elizabeth. She's loud and chirpy, but she's not nuts. What do you mean she's locked in her bedroom with the door nailed shut? No, I'm sorry, the window nailed shut. And I love how quickly it fell apart when it was. I mean, and then the jury was going to be men too, and it was just so silly once it was put on. Even they couldn't find a reason to hold her there, and all that stuff she spent that time writing and observing. She began publishing tremendously. Mostly self-publishing, which was different back then, but and newspapers picked it up, and she was fascinated because she was doing something you didn't do in those days, and that was air dirty laundry, and it needed to be done. You had to see how gross it was. You had to see, she had to, even though, I mean, nobody wants to humiliate their kid's dad because it's going to reflect on the kids. You're going to be the kids of the crazy lady and the terrible father. But she had to do it. She had to do this complete, she had to disgorge and basically strip herself naked and her family and say, this is what happened to us. It's humiliating. And I want you to read every single inch. I want you to look me over. I want you to understand. And it worked because all these laws started getting kicked into place. I mean, eventually even Mary Todd Lincoln was affected by it. And oh my gosh, I have it here somewhere. How many states adapted different laws because of what she wrote about? And can I circle back around to a woman not being a person? I have a great quote from her in here. She said, so when she found out that he ran off with everything, including what was hers, she asked her legal team if she could please recover her lost property somehow legally. And they said, this is her quoting now from one of her books, because she wrote many. She said, no, said my advisors, you cannot replevy anything, for you are a married woman, and a married woman has no legal existence. You are nothing and nobody in law. Your husband has the legal right to all your common property. You have not even the right to the hat on your head. Why, said I. I bought and paid for it with my own money. That is of no consequence. You can hold nothing. You are nothing and nobody in law. So, and the thing is, here's the thing that's, I know.
You're nothing and nobody in law.
Yeah, and that's, yeah, she's right. And the thing is, so people, here's the thing that came up in my other women I researched. If she divorced him, she would have regained a lot of her rights. Single women had rights married women didn't have. And she refused it. She refused to divorce him. She had every legal standing to do so. But in her thinking, that was further humiliation and punishment that would only be visited upon her that she didn't deserve. She said, I've done nothing to deserve the exclusion and rights and privileges of my own dear home. Because if she got divorced, then she would legally not even have a chance to get her home back and her family and her children's custody. She'd never get to see them, even though most of them are half grown by then. So she refused to get divorced. They stayed married until his death. I think he died first. He was a bit older. But they never shared a roof again. They never lived in the same place again.
It really did seem like it was like my impression in the book I read. It was that it really was about the children, that she didn't want to never see her children again. And not some of her children were grown, but not all of them. And her daughter, she had a daughter who, when Elizabeth was put in the asylum, Theo made her do all of the housework and stuff that Elizabeth had done.
Yeah, they didn't even have a maid back then. She did all the housework by herself, which was unusual for 1860.
Yeah, and I think the girl was only 13 or 14. She was young, and she was immediately carrying all the burdens that her mother had done. And it actually I believe it actually made her crazy. That the way that she was treated, her daughter really kind of never recovered mentally. Once she's finally reunited, we're skipping ahead a little bit. When they're finally reunited, though, she ends up really having to care for her daughter the rest of her life. She really doesn't. She's not. It's hard to know exactly what happened there. Obviously, in those
there's going to be a lot of factors because again, she had to. It was her children were not going to come away unscathed. Not just what their father did. And it lands on his shoulders. He started this mess. But Elizabeth took back her power by deciding to pull back the curtain and show them how bad it really was. And there was no way to do that without harming the kids. And so that's what, I hate to use the term collateral damage, but this show, I know you're all about facing ugly truth when you have to. And I don't know, what do you think? Do you think for the children's sake, she maybe should not have done what she did? Should she have been more quiet? At least until they were all grown? She
Actually, my impression is that it just was such a complex situation.
No, she
So
started writing her stuff. She's like saying, "This is what happened to me. I got called crazy. I mean, and remember, this is a time where you don't even say I prefer Earl tea to chamomile because that might offend somebody. You know, it's proper time." But she said, "No, our marriage is terrible. We are, we didn't sleep together. We did this. He said I was crazy. All this filthy laundry for the time. I mean, should she have waited till they were grown, or did it need to get out? I mean, I got,
it all was a part. I think it was all a part of a larger, it was all part of her larger mission. And we're skipping a little bit ahead in the story, but like she ends up actually advocating for legislation changes to help protect the women in the
34
asylum.
bills. 34 bills in different state legislatures, as well as success on the national stage, including an 1875 law allowing asylum inmates mail access, like you mentioned. They had to make a law, 1875, you're allowed to get mail. They probably still read it, but still. Yeah, her behavior, 34 bills for the rights of imprisoned inmates and women. That's really important, including Mary Todd Lincoln, who was found insane, but legally found insane at least.
Well, we actually covered Mary Todd, and that's also a very complex story.
I know, isn't it? Ugh.
Yeah, like it's not it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Like, she listeners, go back and listen to that episode. Because obviously she did have a lot of issues, but also a lot of the issues she faced were because of them taking away the pension that she had been promised and the salary that, went after her husband died. And there was lots of like just very complex issues that weren't even mental issues that, would have made someone mad, and therefore, men didn't care for women who were mad. They really thought that mad women were crazy.
I always wonder how much leeway we should give, because the past is a different country, truly is. The rules were not like they are now, and it's really, really wrong to judge the past by today's standards. That's like the first rule of being a historian for me is, okay, so, I mean, devil's advocate, you have a difficult woman. Today, we have so many options. You and your wife aren't getting along, she's making you miserable, and if people stop coming to your church, you're going to lose your livelihood, your reputation, and everything in your life. Okay, what do? You have 17 different things you can start to, from marriage therapy to anything. What do you do back then where you can't get divorced? If you're a preacher, it ruins your life. You're done. You don't have a career anymore if you get divorced. Do you ever allow your men who are the villains here? This one is kind of a little extra black and white because Theophilus is a total dick and crazy. Yeah. And seriously, you got to see his hairdo. But what should he have done?
But you know what? So I think we just need to actually give more context to the situation, because from what I understand, what was happening in the church with the split with the abolitionists and the anti-abolitionists, and there was a lot of money passing hands. There were some big money people on the anti-abolition side, and they were like paying Theo, like they were like Theo was involved in this in a political way. But he never told that to Elizabeth, is what my understanding is. So, like, if he had said, "Hey, babe, could you shut up because I'm going to lose my job if you keep talking?" Do you think she would have maybe altered her behavior? I don't know.
Point.
I don't actually know. But I don't, like, it doesn't seem like there was at all was a marriage based on, like, conversations.
Theophilus,
right?
Theophilus, Theo, whatever. I can't give him Theo.
Let's just call him Theo. Just call him Theo.
That's a really nice name. I'd love a friend named Theo. It has to be Theophilus or Theophilus.
Theophilus, I don't know.
Dickalicious? I don't know what.
Just call him the asshole of the story, amongst many, because Dr. McFarland was an asshole too.
Asholius had to do what he. Asholius is special because I had so much fun trying to think of a name. I forgot what my point was, but yes.
Well, I think, to answer your question though, like, I start with like, why are we even calling her a difficult woman, right? Like, what are the issues at play here? And is it a disagreement? Is it a marital dispute? Like, there are options now. And would things have gone differently? If they had a better marriage, if they had a more loving, they didn't have a loving marriage. He was very abusive.
Yes.
Maybe not
The
like
reaction
physically,
was a
but
bit
certainly
harsh.
he was extremely withholding in every way in terms of affections and uh it was a very loveless marriage
The
from what
scurrying in when she's not dressed and taking her pulse and shipping her off is so cowardly. There's something undignified about that for
everything
any
he did.
century, any
Everything he
time,
did
any
was cowardly
situation.
because he knew, and the reason he did it that way, from what I understand, is that um, if she had any warning, she would have been able to gather people to support her. But because he
Absolutely.
surprised her in her nightgown, she didn't have time to get a letter out and to like get, because she had so many friends. She was very popular. People would have come to her aid and spoken on her behalf to prevent people from taking her away. But he didn't give her any sort of warning. He just kind of thrust it upon her, which is like what basically everything he did was in the shadows, and so that
Creepy.
she couldn't fight back. And then because her communications were controlled in the insane asylum, and in fact, I think part of the reason she even, like, at one point she did have a friend come to see her, and like that's how she discovered that her mail was being
Yeah, held.
because she was like, "Oh, you didn't get my letters?" And her friend was like, "No, you sent me letters." And she was like, "Yeah, I sent you 30 letters. Like, why didn't you write back?" She's like, she's like, "First of all, I have written you back, but second of all, I've never received your letters."
Such
And
a
so,
horror story.
and
It's
once
so
people started
Rosemary
to find out
Baby.
about it, like the reason the whole facade of her being put away started to crack was that people were starting to find out that the reasons she was put away were a crock of shit.
Yeah.
And she did end up, like, she had people, when she ended up getting out, she ended up staying with some friends that helped her raise money, and they helped her, like, basically kind of build up from scratch after Dickhead had left and taken the
As
kids.
holiest. Um, yeah, she was able by the end of it. Within 20 years, she was able to completely support herself on her own writings and her appearances, enough to support her children to come see her too. She got to see them again. She ended up living like down the hill from one of her sons.
Yeah.
I found in my research, I found the Chicago Evening Post from 1869, and they just titled it "The End of the Packard Matter," which means it was, you know, they thought it was a little bit of a debasement to go the stuff we only click on today, the tabloidy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But they did say that. Let's see here. The article said a public exchange of letters between Elizabeth and her three remaining minor age children, now all teenagers. They declared they were happy to come and live with her, provided they could still see their father and be allowed to follow their own religious beliefs. She agreed to these conditions, and the family, including the three grown children, so 6 total, were reunited. So she got to be with her children. She missed her being grown up, being raised, and all that, but
Yeah.
she got a little bit of happy ending. I get
Yeah.
no, it's not a happy ending, but it's an important ending. That's
Yeah. And like, what was clear to me is that the kids, the daughter accepting, because the daughter had mental issues, and wasn't just quite in her right mind.
Can you
But
imagine being the daughter of that going
no,
on? No,
no,
we
I
really
can't.
can't. We
But the
can't.
but the sons who had been a little bit older at the time that she was taken, like, it was very clear that they understood their father was a fucking asshole. like they understood that, and that they did. You ask whether she damaged the family permanently. Theo damaged the family permanently
Yeah.
by putting her away, by
Yeah.
taking her away. And
And the ladylike thing would have been to be hush about it when she finally got out. Certainly, okay, if you have to go to court for your rights, okay. But she went one step further and said, and this is every dirty detail of what he did, every indignity, everything a lady's supposed to cover up. Even today, you don't put on your Facebook feed that I'm getting the pull-ups up my butt looked at today. Yay! I mean, I do because I'm awesome, but you didn't do it back then, and she did. She just said, "Here's everything," and none of us are going to come out smelling like a rose here. Well, 100 years later, I am, but not now. And she did it. She had to, and it changed the world.
yeah,
And I'm so proud of her for that.
I'm proud of her too. And the thing is that when she uncovers all that, think about, she's not just uncovering their personal laundry. There's also like the uncovering of the hypocrisy of the system,
Oh
right? And that
God,
her husband is this religious, he's a reverend who at the time was revered. He did not end his life
yeah,
revered. He ended his life very lowly. He ended up losing his job, and he was a fucking loser,
you don't
to be
recover
honest.
from
Like, he
that.
wasn't, like, whatever job he was trying to
Who
hold on
buried
to.
him?
Yeah. I love that term, fucking loser. This guy's a fucking loser. We all know what we're talking. You know what I'm talking about. We've met these people. But I think that for her, she did not ever get off her kind of religious pedestal of her beliefs and like what was right. And part of her writing was also proving that, listen, whatever this version of religion is fucked up.
Right.
And it's not right. And I think that was part of her argument. So could she have made those arguments without the kind of self-evidence that she brought forward, which was the hypocrisy of the marriage? And I would say, like, I don't think that, part of the reason she was able to garner the support of everybody was their true understanding of her circumstances. And if you're not revealing your true circumstances, and if you're, omitting things and glossing them over, would people have taken her quite as seriously? And I don't know the answer. You don't know there's no way to know, right?
But they did. She straddled the line of not turning people off by showing too much, because
she did.
That's hard to do even today.
Yeah.
People have your people's sympathy up until a point where you're just kind of gross. If you go too far, people pull back a little. We just do. I can't think of a modern day example, but it happens. We're a fickle species.
Yeah.
But she managed to just keep the line and hold it. Yeah, I mean, maybe you wouldn't want to invite her to your nicest, most quiet tea party.
Yeah.
But she did what she had to do, and she was extremely popular, even though she was a bit of a wild card.
Yeah. I mean, she did straddle the line. She wasn't popular with everybody. Like her arguments, people who were deeply entrenched in the patriarchy did not care for her arguments. And, we just recently did an episode on Victoria Woodhull, the first woman who ran for president.
I have her. I love her so much.
She's great.
She didn't actually run for president. Don't get me started. She didn't care. She just wanted to.
Right. Cool. Right. But she was in a very similar time period. So she's like slightly after the period we're talking about here with Elizabeth. But her whole concept of free love, that was about the ability to be able to be divorced from your husband.
She could not have called it. She wanted, free love. She just wanted the ability, because she got married, she met the doctor she married at 14, married him when she was 15.
Yeah.
He's horrible, abusive, drunk. She's supposed to stay with him for the rest of her dang life.
Yeah, he was also a loser.
Yes. A fucking loser, Sara. Lean into it, hon. Lean into it. And she's like, to her, free love meant I'm allowed to choose who I want to be with. Which
right.
Maybe she should have called it that, because when you say free love, people think of a big, fleshy, stinky, orgasmic orgy pit.
Well, that's, the 70s and 80s. The term changed a little bit.
But she just wanted the freedom to say, "Oh my gosh, I'm the guy that took me when I was 14 doesn't get to keep me." That's all she wanted.
Yeah, exactly. And more or less, I think Elizabeth, the rights she fought for. So I do want to talk a little bit more too. So after things ended with Theo, finally, that loser was out of her life, and she really did hit the pavement, and she became an advocate for the rights of basically imprisoned women in the asylum. And let's see, in 1867, the state of Illinois passed a, quote, bill for the protection of personal liberty. And that guaranteed that all people accused of insanity, including wives, had a right to a public hearing. This was a whole thing in her journey where, like, she almost didn't get a trial. Like, she had to, like, really petition, and basically her friends had to petition, and they had to, like,
if she started with a public trial, it would have been over. But it was over. It was a 7-minute jury deliberation when she finally got one. It would have been a 7-minute jury deliberation then too, because it was pretty goddamn ridiculous. But yeah, she fought for that.
Yep, she fought for that, and that similar bills were passed in other states as well.
34 bills.
Yes,
34 bills.
And this was a time when that right didn't even exist. People were just allowed to fester in the hospitals. And if you read more about the asylum and the state of it, it was fucking terrible. It was awful.
It was.
And they had the people in there had no recourse. Their letters weren't getting out. They were just trapped. And if their family didn't give a shit about them, which for these women, was the case, their husbands gave no shits. Like, there was just no recourse for these women. And women who should not have been there were there and couldn't get out, and their lives were ruined.
Needed help, weren't getting help. They were getting. The rest of us were being protected from them. which again in history you got to allow for how much resources were available to a certain society at a certain time. And then every now and then someone comes along and pushes and says, let's try for a little more. And that's what Elizabeth did. I mean, there may not have been great mental health resources in 1865. I'm willing to bet there wasn't a lot of great stuff in 1865.
Yeah.
But then every now and then somebody comes along and says, okay, true, but let's try for a little bit more. And she pushes it 2 inches more. And then someone comes along and 20 years later and does 4 inches more. And then finally we have something decent.
And it wasn't just the rights of committed people. Also, it was the rights of. So there was I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything here on my list of all the things she did. But she also did get legislation passed in Illinois and Massachusetts in 1869 that allowed married women equal rights to property and custody of their children. Huge. And that was basically the turning point. Like, that's when Theo ceded custody back to her of the kids too. That was like, he had been fighting and not letting the children speak to her and like withholding information from them and fighting her, you know, more or less evading her messages and dodging her requests.
Stuff and left the state. What a coward. I'm sorry. I know that's going back, but it speaks to his freaking character. I mean, obviously the big stuff, he's a jerk. Yeah, we can see that bright and clear. But then the tiny things, like the selling of her belongings for extra cash so he can run away in the night, it's gross. It's not just evil, it's just also gross.
He also didn't have any money and he didn't have a job. He didn't, like, he was running for many reasons, but one of which was to get away from her.
And what she told the world he was.
Yeah.
And I wish I had been able to find some rebuttals from him, but I didn't. I'd like to know what.
He even run away like during her trial.
Like
he was supposed to show up in court, and they were like, "Where is this dude?" And when
state with her money,
and then and so while they're at trial, and he's supposed to be there testifying, instead he's running away
with her money again. He sold her stuff. He mortgaged the house and took her kids, and he just. I know he's evil, but it's almost too glamorous to call him evil with a big E, because he wasn't. He was a little weasel who was benefited by a really messed up system. Yeah. And then he got a comeuppance then and now. I love a good comeuppance, Sarah. I love.
Tell us the comeuppance. Tell the audience. They don't know.
What?
What's his comeuppance?
Oh, just the fact that he never got to be the powerful leader of men he insisted he was going to be. That everything he was trying to prevent by shutting her up and putting her away, he lost every inch of it. Every single person recognizes his weird face. I'm going to just show. Can you see how stupid he looked?
Yeah.
You see that? It's like he looks like a perpetually crowning fetus coming out of the vaginal canal. Anyway, so you can't ignore that face when you see it coming. You know who he is, and you know he's famous.
Yeah. And his fall from grace happened pretty quickly after she was put in. Like, he pretty quickly lost everything, you know. And obviously, Elizabeth's story goes on a very long time. You know, she doesn't die until 1897.
Right. And she kept writing and publishing. And
she published many different books, many of them about her spirituality, about the asylums. She became kind of a prolific writer after that, and she made money off her writings. You know, she her stuff was published, and she was making money off of them, like her own brain. She became fiscally independent on her own at a time when not a lot of women were doing that, right?
How do you? Yes. Sorry, we're just agreeing and getting excited with each other. But
I know, because she basically
usually when I'm brought up when I talk about a historical person, I'm like, I always want to say, okay, what motivated that person to make that decision? Like, usually I want to say what motivated somebody bad in history to be bad. There had to be a circumstance. And as Holy is here, I have tried so hard to see his point of view. I've tried even talking with you, like maybe he was afraid of. No, there's just nothing there. There's nothing redeeming. There's not a leg to stand on. He was just bad and nasty and cowardly and slimy. And sometimes it's awfully cathartic to find black and white, good and evil.
I feel like we've covered her story. Talk a little bit more about your book and about like some of the other broads you cover in the book and how people can find it, and like just spend a second plugging yourself, because you're obviously incredibly digging into these women.
So I got, we're going to call them 18. One of them is actually a sister act of 3. I got 18 broads in here. I hope it's not backwards on your side. It's a cute little dip of a book, hardback. It's available everywhere books are sold, Amazon, etc. From Simon & Schuster, Simon Element. Anyone that we already knew or anyone that was just absolutely wonderful. I purposely avoided. I tried to get people you haven't heard of, or if you've heard of them, you haven't heard the whole story. Like Carrie Nation. You ever heard of her? She's sort of semi. She was before Prohibition. Some states still had Prohibition, and she was very anti-alcohol. And she used to walk into a saloon and say, "Good morning, sinners," and take an axe and start hatcheting up all the barrels of booze.
Oh my God!
Because she didn't like booze. And that, she's a joke. Carrie Nation, all nations welcome except Carrie, stuff like that, and put in bars. And I wanted to find out why she did that. And so it turned out she had some pretty freaking deep reasons, like a deeply deformed child and stuff caused her to be that way.
Oh my goodness.
It was really important to me to find out why these odd women were odd. So I've got women like that in my book, and then I've got a lady who made a huge difference to my whole family's life for the past 100 years, is a lady named Lena Bryant. She was a 16-year-old immigrant, a Jewish immigrant from Lithuania.
Oh my gosh.
She couldn't sew. She couldn't speak English, but she learned to really quick because she was super smart. And she bought a store on Fifth Avenue in New York City because she invented the maternity dress. And nobody knows this, but you do know her because when she signed the bank loan for her store, she misplaced the letters of her name as Elaine Bryant. Yeah. So Elaine Bryant was a woman who not only invented the first ever commercial maternity wear ever, which she could not advertise because maternity was such a filthy word, but she sold out her stock. Then the people who didn't lose weight after the baby said, "Can you help me?" And she said, "I sure can." And she developed a line that made women of my family for 100 years feel like humans. So I love her.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea.
I got the only woman to ever get a Congressional Medal of Honor. And then they tried to come take it back from her.
Of course they did.
Come get it.
These women all sound amazing. We might have to have you back on the pod to talk about them too.
I love
listeners. Again, the name of the book is Unbecoming a Lady: The Forgotten Sluts and Shrews Who Shaped America. And I'm going to have a picture of the book itself and a link to buy it on the website, as well as all of Therese's stuff, so you can read more about her. Thank you for being here. You've been such a great guest.
I babbled a lot, but I did it with great enthusiasm and passion.
That is all we care about on this podcast, Therese. You are fantastic, and hopefully we'll have you back again to talk about some of those other broads. And in the meantime, listeners, check out her book and all of those other amazing broads you should know, and then come back next week for another broad you should know.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Bye-bye, everybody.
To learn more about Elizabeth Packard and see photos of her, head on over to broadsyoushouldknow.com. While you're there, click on over to the About page and read more about Therese Oneill. Her bio, photo, links to her stuff, including her book, are all right there. Are you following Broads You Should Know on social? We're on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube at Broads You Should Know and Twitter at BYSK Podcast. To suggest a broad, fill out the form on our website or email us at broadsyoushouldknow@gmail.com. If you're a fan of this podcast, help spread the word about us. Share an episode with your friends or family, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That really helps new listeners to find us. Broads You Should Know is produced and edited by me, Sara Gorski, with original music by Darren Callahan. Finally, if you really enjoyed hearing Elizabeth Packard's story, then I highly recommend you check out a few of our previous broad episodes, especially the couple we mentioned in this episode, Mary Todd Lincoln and Victoria Woodhull, and also one of my favorite, quote, crazy ladies, Sarah Winchester. See you next week for another Broad You Should Know.